At 7-Eleven that morning, I clicked confirm to keep my company alive for another week, and my bank screen flashed red. Personal, operating, escrow, all locked in the same minute. Reading the emergency freeze order, my heart stopped. The most terrifying part wasn't the forged $500,000 promissory note. It was realizing my own sister knew exactly which hour to strike my ultimate weak point. My name is Isla Simmons. At 37 years old, I carry the heavy, unrelenting weight of Ridgeline Utility Recovery on my shoulders. I built this disaster infrastructure recovery firm from a single leased bucket truck into a massive operation that deploys over 80 field technicians, engineers, and office personnel across the coast. When hurricanes rip the power grid apart, my people are the ones standing waist deep in the mud, wrestling high voltage lines and crushed transformers back into place. They bleed for this company, working in conditions that would break most people. In return, I make an unbreakable promise. I make sure their direct deposits hit their bank accounts every single Friday. No delays, no excuses. This morning began like 1,000 others. The sun had not yet crested the horizon, painting my kitchen in quiet shades of slate and charcoal. The coffee maker hummed its familiar, comforting tune in the background. I sat at my granite island with my laptop open and my secure tokens ready, prepared to execute the lifeblood of my business, the weekly financial approvals. It was a rigorous, precise ritual. I had to clear the master payroll batch, authorize the federal labor tax deposits, release the advance payments for copper wire and diesel fuel, and settle the heavy machinery insurance premiums. The operational machine needed grease, and I was the one holding the oil can. I opened my commercial banking application on my phone to authenticate the first internal transfer. Instead of the usual biometric prompt, a blank, white screen stared back at me, followed by an obscure system error code. A slight frown creased my forehead. Inconvenient, but not unheard of. Commercial banking platforms were notoriously clunky before normal business hours. I set the phone aside and pulled up the primary web portal on my laptop, typing in my administrative credentials with practiced speed. The dashboard loaded. I felt my breath hitch as I leaned closer. The entire screen was painted in an aggressive, alarming crimson red. It was not a system glitch. It was a massacre. Every single account was frozen. The primary operating account, the payroll reserve, the equipment escrow, even my personal checking and savings accounts. Beside every ledger balance, a brutal, uncompromising banner flashed in stark capital letters: legal hold, court-ordered attachment. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I scrambled for the mouse, clicking frantically into the specific account details. The available balance on every single line read exactly zero, not just restricted, obliterated. The banking system had marked the accounts under a maximum freeze directive. My ability to execute the payroll batch, the one scheduled to process in exactly 3 hours, was completely paralyzed. My men were out there right now, strapping on steel-toed boots and hard hats, trusting me to take care of their families, and I possessed zero liquidity to do it. My phone vibrated violently against the granite countertop. The caller identification displayed the name Reed Tanner, my private commercial banker. Reed never called before 8 in the morning unless the building was literally on fire. I answered, skipping any polite pleasantries. Reed, what is happening? My dashboard looks like a crime scene. His voice was tight with the kind of dread bankers usually hide. Isla, I am so sorry. I tried to catch this before the automated system locked you out, but my hands are completely tied. We were served with an emergency ex parte order of attachment from the county civil court at exactly 7 this morning. The compliance department executed it immediately. An ex parte order, I repeated, the legal term tasting like ash in my mouth. It meant a judge had heard only one side of a story, in secret, before dropping a nuclear bomb on my life. Who filed this? For what read? I have an 80-person payroll batch that needs to run today. You have to lift this hold right now. I cannot. Isla, nobody here can. It is a strict court mandate. The freeze order has been executed for a maximum attachment value of $680,000. I gripped the edge of the kitchen island. $680,000. It was an absurd, staggering figure. It was enough to wipe out my entire working capital and bleed heavily into the client escrow funds. Who is the plaintiff? Reed. Who filed this against me? There was a heavy, terrible pause on the line. I could hear the rustle of paper as Reed looked at the physical filing. The plaintiff is listed as Mara Simmons. The kitchen seemed to tilt on its axis. The ambient noise of the refrigerator vanished, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in my ears. "Read that again," I whispered. "Mara Simmons," Reed confirmed gently, knowing exactly who she was. "The petition alleges that you are in default on a signed promissory note valued at $500,000. The remaining $180,000 accounts for calculated interest, punitive damages, and requested legal fees. The judge granted the emergency freeze because the petition included evidence that you were actively preparing to dissipate corporate assets into out-of-state holding companies in Nevada and Wyoming. Mara, my biological sister." My mind rejected the information at first, then slowly forced me to process it. Mara, who had spent her entire adult life running away from the smell of diesel and the intense stress of our family legacy. Mara, who had explicitly refused to invest a single dime or 1 hour of sweat into Ridgeline utility recovery when I was building it from absolute nothing. She had always viewed my work with a toxic mixture of disdain and entitlement, treating my hard-earned success as a personal affront to her own lack of direction. But this was not a passive-aggressive remark at a holiday dinner. This was a calculated, lethal strike. She was claiming a $500,000 debt, a promissory note, a piece of paper that absolutely did not exist, because I had never borrowed money from her. I had never needed to. Yet, she had somehow convinced a sitting judge that I owed her a fortune and was about to flee the jurisdiction to avoid paying it. "Isla," Reed called out, his voice pulling me back from the edge of the abyss. "Are you there? I have forwarded the entire legal packet to your encrypted email. You need to call Noah immediately. If you cannot get a judge to quash this writ by this afternoon, checks will start bouncing by tomorrow morning." "I am here, Reed," I said, my voice shockingly level despite the chaos in my head. "Thank you for the call. I will handle it." I ended the connection and set the phone face down on the counter. I stood completely still in the center of my kitchen. The morning light was finally breaking through the windows, casting long, harsh shadows across the hardwood floor. I did not scream. I did not hurl my coffee mug against the wall. I did not collapse into a puddle of tears over the profound, incomprehensible betrayal of my own flesh and blood. Instead, my eyes locked onto the digital clock on the microwave. The glowing numbers ticked forward relentlessly. Every passing minute was a drop of oxygen siphoned directly from my company's lungs. I had a rapidly shrinking window to figure out how to pay 80 families. This was not a tragic misunderstanding. This was not a familial dispute over inheritance or bruised egos. As I stared at the countdown to my operational ruin, a freezing, absolute clarity washed over me. Mara knew my cash flow cycle. She knew exactly which day the payroll taxes and insurance premiums were due. She had timed this ex parte order to hit precisely when my liquid reserves were staged for deployment, ensuring the maximum possible devastation. She had engineered a corporate strangulation, weaponizing the legal system to choke the life out of everything I had built. She expected me to panic, to beg, to fold under the immense pressure of a catastrophic cash crisis. She knew me well enough to find the exact artery to sever, but she had forgotten how I reacted when backed into a corner. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the terror morph into something entirely different. Something cold and precise. The younger sister I knew was gone, replaced by a ruthless adversary who had just declared total war. I turned back to my laptop, opened the encrypted email from Reed, and began to read the lies she had sworn under oath. I slammed my laptop shut. The digital files my banker had forwarded were grainy, low-resolution black and white scans that offered absolutely zero forensic value. I could not fight a phantom through a computer screen, and I certainly could not analyze a forgery from a compressed image. I ignored the urge to grab my phone, call my sister, and demand an explanation. That was the reaction of a victim. She wanted me to call her. She wanted me crying, panicking, and begging for a momentary reprieve while my business suffocated in the background. Instead, I grabbed my car keys off the kitchen counter, walked out the front door, and got into my vehicle. The drive to the county civil court took exactly 22 minutes, but it felt like traversing an entirely different lifetime. The morning traffic was a meaningless blur of brake lights and exhaust fumes. I navigated the city streets with a chilling, absolute detachment. When I arrived at the courthouse, a massive, imposing structure built from heavy gray limestone and dark-tinted glass, I walked straight through the metal detectors without making eye contact with the guards. I did not pause in the grand lobby to gather my thoughts or calm my racing pulse. I took the heavy marble stairs directly down to the basement, heading straight for the Civil Records Division. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a sick, yellow hum, casting long shadows across the linoleum floor. I approached the thick plexiglass window and gave the clerk my full name and the specific docket number my banker had provided over the phone. I demanded the complete, physical case file attached to the morning ex parte order. The clerk, an older woman with tired eyes and a slow, methodical pace, disappeared into the stacks. She returned 3 minutes later and slid a dense, heavy manila folder through the narrow slot at the bottom of the glass. I took it without a word of thanks, retreating to a heavily scarred wooden table situated in the farthest, darkest corner of the public viewing room. I took one long, stabilizing breath, filling my lungs with the stale, paper-scented air of the basement, and opened the cover. Reading the file was like peeling back the skin of a highly sophisticated, meticulously planned financial crime. Right on top lay Mara's sworn affidavit. I read it slowly, forcing myself to digest every single word of her fabricated reality. The narrative she had constructed was not just a simple lie. It was a beautifully engineered piece of legal fiction designed to evoke maximum sympathy from a judge while painting me as a corporate monster. She detailed a compelling story originating exactly 6 years ago, a time when my company was desperately clawing its way through a brutal, freezing winter, drowning in heavy equipment leases and starved for cash flow. According to the sworn document, Mara had stepped out of the shadows as my benevolent, secret savior. She swore under penalty of perjury that she had quietly liquidated her own personal assets to provide me with a $500,000 emergency bailout loan to keep the lights on and the trucks running. The sheer audacity of the specific details made the muscles in my jaw clench tight enough to ache. The affidavit outlined a predatory repayment schedule. It was explicitly tied to my company's gross revenue milestones, burdened with a staggering 18% annual interest rate. Mara painted a vivid, deeply tragic picture of herself as the patient, long-suffering sibling who only wanted to help. She claimed I had deliberately dodged her phone calls, ignored her certified letters, and completely stonewalled her desperate attempts to collect her life savings, all while she was forced to watch my enterprise expand into a highly lucrative, multi-state operation. Then came the hook, the lethal mechanism she used to secure the immediate, devastating freeze without ever giving me a chance to stand before a judge and defend myself. I turned the page to the exhibits attached to her sworn statement. My stomach bottomed out, leaving a cold, hollow void in my chest. Attached were printed copies of actual, legitimate emails I had written exactly 3 months ago. They were private messages addressed directly to my corporate tax attorney, asking for routine legal advice regarding the operational logistics and tax benefits of structuring subsidiary limited liability companies in the states of Nevada and Wyoming. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. These were highly confidential internal communications. Mara had somehow breached my perimeter. She had gained access to my private, secure correspondence. But she had stripped away the routine corporate tax planning context. She presented the emails as proof that I was hiding cash and moving assets across state lines to avoid paying a debt to her. It was a flawless tactical strike. Any civil judge looking at those emails, paired with her emotional sob story and the staggering dollar amount, would immediately sign an emergency attachment order to prevent a flight risk. Finally, I turned to the last page. I reached the poison pill, Exhibit A, the purported promissory note. I stared down at the heavy bond paper. A sudden, violent wave of vertigo crashed over me. Right there, anchored at the bottom right corner of the page, was my signature. I stopped breathing. The quiet hum of the basement faded into total silence. The ink flowed with my exact, distinct cadence. The aggressive, sharp slant of the letters, the heavy, deliberate pressure on the final, sweeping loop of my last name. It was absolutely flawless. For one horrifying, chaotic second, my own sanity fractured. Did I sign this? Was I so utterly exhausted, so completely desperate during that freezing winter 6 years ago, that I had blindly signed a blank document just to get her to leave me alone? Did I make a deal with the devil and simply block the trauma from my memory? The reality of the dusty basement room seemed to bend and warp around me, making me seriously question my own mind. I forced myself to blink hard, shaking my head to clear the terrifying fog. I gripped the sharp edges of the wooden table until the joints in my fingers throbbed. I leaned closer to the document, bringing my face less than an inch from the paper. I let the emotional panic drain away, forcing my analytical, problem-solving brain to take absolute command. I studied the signature again, but this time, I ignored the shape of the letters. I focused entirely on the spatial relationships on the page. Yes, the sharp, downward stroke of the capital letter S was undeniably mine. But then, the illusion shattered. I saw the fatal, glaring flaw. It was the gap. The physical distance between the lowest descending tail of my signature and the solid black printed line beneath it was completely wrong. It was unnaturally misaligned, hovering awkwardly in the empty white space. I knew my own physical habits intimately. Whenever I signed binding legal contracts, my pen always drove firmly and deeply through the signature line, crossing it like a physical barrier. This signature was floating. It had not been written onto this piece of paper by a human hand holding a pen. It had been lifted, digitally or physically transplanted from another source, and dropped onto the page long after the text of the contract had been printed. Beside my floating, stolen name sat a perfectly crisp, bright blue notary stamp, accompanied by the scrawled signature of a notary public I had never met or hired in my entire life. I slowly closed the heavy manila folder. The sound echoed dull and flat in the quiet room. In that exact moment, the very last remnants of my familial attachment to my sister evaporated, leaving behind nothing but cold, hardened steel. I did not feel any lingering sorrow. I did not waste another second wondering how a sibling could do something so incredibly malicious to her own blood. I refused to debate the emotional betrayal or ask why. The courtroom did not give a damn about broken sibling bonds or hurt feelings. A judge only cared about what could be proven with hard, undeniable facts. Mara had drawn a treasure map of lies, assuming I would be too blinded by panic to look closely at the ink. She was wrong. I was going to follow her footprints backward until I found the exact spot where she dug the grave. I shifted my mind entirely out of the role of a betrayed sister and into a state of total corporate war. I did not need family reasoning. I needed physical, irrefutable evidence. The concrete of the parking garage felt solid beneath my heels as I left the courthouse. Each step a rhythmic drumbeat matching the rapid calculations firing in my brain. I was not running away in a panic. I was actively walking backward along the timeline of my own life, hunting for the exact moment the security breach occurred. How did she acquire a perfect, flawless replica of my signature? My mind drifted back 4.5 years. After our mother passed away, there was a chaotic, emotionally draining period of sorting out the estate. Mara had volunteered for exactly one task. She wanted to clean out the large, climate-controlled storage unit where we kept the old family files, photo albums, and, crucially, the early foundational paperwork for my business. She claimed she wanted to preserve the family memories and spare me the emotional burden. I had handed her the master access code without a single second of hesitation. I reached my car but did not unlock it immediately. I leaned against the driver's side door, closing my eyes and forcing my memory to pry open those cardboard banker boxes. What exactly was sitting in that storage unit? I started categorizing every single piece of paper I had signed during the first 3 brutal years of Ridgeline's existence. There was the original commercial lease for our very first equipment yard, signed in blue ink. There were the heavy personal guarantees I had to sign for our initial fleet of bucket trucks. I remembered stacks of signed bank authorization letters, comprehensive liability insurance applications, and vendor credit agreements. Hundreds of documents bore my wet, authentic, high-pressure signature. The realization hit me with the devastating force of a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. The signature on that court document was not a clever, practiced imitation drawn by a highly skilled hand. It was an exact, high-resolution copy of a real signature. It had been lifted directly from a piece of paper sitting in that storage unit, digitally extracted, and grafted onto a fabricated contract. That explained the unnatural, floating alignment. It was a digital transplant. Then, the second piece of the puzzle snapped into place with a loud, metallic click in my mind. As I finally unlocked my car door and slid into the leather seat, the image of that bright blue notary stamp flashed behind my eyes. It was a self-inking rectangular stamp featuring a very specific, sleek border design and a small security code embedded in the bottom corner. 6 years ago, when this alleged $500,000 loan supposedly took place, the State Notary Commission was still primarily issuing traditional circular rubber stamps and heavy metal embossed seals. The modern, digital-ready rectangular format stamped on that exhibit only became the standard issue a little over 2 years ago. Mara had purchased a forgery, but whoever manufactured the lie had used a contemporary notary tool for a backdated document. She was dangerously sloppy. I started the engine. The dashboard roared to life, but I ignored the GPS. I grabbed my phone and dialed Noah Mercer. Noah was my lead corporate litigation bulldog, a brilliant, aggressive man who viewed commercial disputes as absolute blood sport. He answered on the exact second ring, his tone already clipped and highly urgent, clearly having digested the digital file Reed had sent him. "I am drafting the motion to quash right now," Noah began, the rapid, staccato clicking of his mechanical keyboard echoing loudly over the speakerphone. "We need to get you in front of a duty judge by tomorrow morning to aggressively argue the catastrophic operational damage this sudden freeze is causing. We will plead for an immediate, partial release of the payroll funds to keep your workforce operational." "No," I cut him off, my voice remarkably steady and completely devoid of the panic he was expecting to hear. "Stop drafting the motion to quash. We are not going to court to beg for a temporary Band-Aid." The keyboard clicking stopped instantly. The silence on the line was heavy. "Isla, listen to me very carefully. You have an 80-person payroll batch that is currently choking to death. If we do not explicitly ask the court to lift this hold, you are effectively insolvent by Friday morning. Your checks will bounce. Your crews will walk off the job sites. If we go in there and just argue financial hardship, we legitimize the underlying dispute," I countered, shifting the car into gear and pulling out of the dark garage into the blinding mid-morning sunlight. "We make it look like a standard he said, she said family squabble over an unpaid debt, and we are just asking for leniency. I am not playing her emotional game. Noah, I want you to draft and file an emergency motion to compel." "Compel what?" he asked, his voice tightening with a mixture of professional confusion and rising concern. "The physical, original paper. I want the original, wet ink version of that promissory note impounded by the court and handed over to an independent, highly credentialed forensic document examiner immediately. I want this done before any other hearing takes place." Noah exhaled a long, heavy breath into the receiver. I could picture him rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Isla, you need to understand the optics here. Opposing counsel will instantly frame that demand as a bad faith delay tactic. They will tell the judge you are deliberately stalling the process to buy more time to hide your assets offshore, which is exactly the narrative the initial freeze order is based upon. Furthermore, a proper forensic analysis takes days, maybe even weeks. You do not have weeks. You do not even have 12 hours. While the laboratory is looking at paper fibers and ink molecules under a microscope, your company will completely bleed out. You will miss payroll. Your fuel suppliers will cut you off. You will trigger default clauses on your primary municipal contracts. I am not going to default on a single contract, I stated flatly, merging onto the busy interstate. My mind was operating with a terrifying, icy clarity. I was no longer a victim reacting to a strike. I was a chief executive officer restructuring a battlefield. The ex parte order explicitly targeted my depository accounts. It froze the cash sitting in the bank. It did not touch my borrowing capacity. I have a massive, completely untouched commercial line of credit and 3 platinum corporate credit cards with limits high enough to purchase a small fleet of utility trucks. There was a brief, stunned silence on the line as my lawyer processed the financial maneuver. We are going to pivot, I continued, outlining the aggressive battle plan as I navigated the heavy traffic. I will immediately draw down the commercial credit line to cover the absolute mandatory operational expenses. I will use the corporate cards to pay your entire retainer and the expedited premium fees for the most ruthless, thorough forensic laboratory you can possibly find. Let Mara sit at home and think she has choked off my oxygen supply. She only clamped my liquid cash. I will run this entire enterprise on high-interest debt for the next 2 weeks if I have to. But I am absolutely not stepping foot into a courtroom to argue about my feelings or my family history. We are going to put that piece of paper under a microscope, and we are going to scientifically dismantle her. That is a highly aggressive posture, Noah finally said, a slow, deep edge of pure professional approval creeping into his tone. And it is incredibly risky. If the credit lines max out before the forensic report comes back, you lose everything. She brought a forged weapon into a court of law to destroy my life, I replied, staring straight at the endless stretch of asphalt ahead of me. I am going to make her choke on it. Find the lab. Noah, get the motion filed. I walked into the Ridgeline Utility Recovery Headquarters precisely 45 minutes after hanging up with my corporate attorney. The bustling, loud energy of the main operations floor usually served as my daily caffeine, a comforting symphony of dispatch radios, ringing phones, and project managers shouting over each other. Today, the noise felt incredibly fragile, like a thin sheet of glass resting precariously over a massive sinkhole. I did not make eye contact with anyone as I marched straight to the executive suite. David, Marcus, Sarah. My office, now, I commanded, projecting a voice of absolute, unquestionable authority. I did not wait for their responses. The 3 of them filed into my workspace less than 60 seconds later. I shut the heavy soundproof glass door and firmly hit the mechanical switch to lower the privacy blinds. I turned to face my core leadership team. We have a critical, immediate liquidity blockade, I announced, keeping my posture rigid and my tone utterly devoid of panic. A malicious, hostile third-party entity has weaponized a fabricated civil filing to execute a temporary emergency attachment order on all of our primary depository accounts. I deliberately omitted the word sister. I did not mention her name. If the executive team knew my own flesh and blood was attempting to bankrupt the enterprise, the internal psychological panic would be absolutely uncontrollable. They needed a faceless corporate enemy to fight, not a family tragedy to gossip about. I need every single ounce of your focus for the next 6 hours, I continued, locking eyes with each of them. Sarah, our weekly payroll batch is the absolute non-negotiable priority. You will not miss the cutoff. I am officially authorizing a direct manual draw from our emergency commercial credit line to cover the salaries of all 80 field technicians and our entire office staff. Call the processing vendor. Route the funds manually through the credit facility if you have to bypass the frozen operating account. Make it happen. Sarah nodded sharply, her face pale but determined, already typing frantically on her tablet. I pivoted to my vice president of operations. Marcus, fuel and heavy equipment rentals. who desperately needs our cash today. Marcus did not even need to check his ledger. We have 3 major bulk diesel suppliers expecting wire transfers by noon, plus the Crane Leasing Company down in the southern sector. Call them immediately, I instructed. Tell them our primary banking routing numbers are currently undergoing a mandatory emergency security migration. I will put their entire invoices on the Platinum corporate credit cards. I will gladly pay the exorbitant processing fees. I do not care what the premium costs today. Marcus, but I promise you, not a single generator goes quiet on our disaster recovery job sites. Keep the machines running. Finally, I turned to David, my incredibly conservative, risk-averse interim chief financial officer. He was already sweating. David, I need you to halt all non-essential outbound capital. Defer the Q3 tax prepayments. Postpone the signed office lease upgrade indefinitely. Then, pull the active contracts for the 2 municipal hurricane recovery jobs we just started. Both of those massive contracts contain a 30% emergency mobilization advance clause that we never utilize because we are usually cash-rich. Trigger those clauses immediately. Draft the demand letters and send them to the city managers. David swallowed hard. Isla, requesting those advances makes us look highly unstable to the municipalities. Being unable to pay our workers makes us look dead, I shot back fiercely. Furthermore, get on the phone with our secondary private commercial lender. I want a massive, unsecured bridge loan facility open and ready to draw by 2 o'clock this afternoon. I will stomach whatever predatory, borderline illegal interest rate they demand to ensure we have a massive, impenetrable cushion of operating capital sitting in a fresh account by tomorrow morning. As my executive team scattered to execute their aggressive survival directives, I grabbed my desk phone and paged our lead systems architect. I need a complete, impenetrable forensic quarantine and backup of our entire digital infrastructure. I ordered the second he picked up the receiver. Every single email, every internal server access log, every deleted file, and specifically, I need the raw metadata on every single document scanned into our archive over the past 7 years. Lock the administrative access down. Treat our servers like an active, heavily guarded crime scene, because this civil case is rapidly turning into a potential federal criminal investigation. Just as I slammed the receiver down, my personal cell phone vibrated violently against the mahogany desk. It was Noah. We got a faint pulse, my attorney stated, his voice tight, exhausted, but laced with a sliver of triumph. The duty judge was furious about the sudden disruption to an active municipal emergency contractor. I could not get the financial hold completely lifted without a grueling, multi-day evidentiary hearing, but I forced a major concession regarding the physical evidence. The court has officially ordered the opposing counsel to surrender the original wet ink promissory note to the Morrow Document Sciences Laboratory by exactly 5 o'clock this evening under a highly strict chain of custody. We are getting our microscope. Isla? Good work. Noah, I replied. Before I could utter another syllable, a secondary notification popped up on my phone screen, interrupting the call screen. I put Noah on a brief hold and opened the incoming message. It was a text message from Mara. Isla, I know you are incredibly stressed right now. Let us just sit down and talk like sisters used to. I really do not want to destroy your business. Meet me for coffee at noon. It would be a real tragedy if your poor, hard-working people missed their 3 o'clock direct deposit cutoff because you were too stubborn to talk to your own family. My thumb hovered over the brightly lit screen. It was a sickening, beautifully timed, highly calculated psychological strike. She was actively monitoring my operational clock. She knew exactly when the bank automated clearinghouse batch was scheduled to process. I switched the call back to Noah. She just texted me. She wants to meet at a coffee shop at noon. Absolutely do not go, Noah warned instantly, his litigator instincts flaring. She is trying to bait you into an emotional confrontation to get you to say something, anything, she can record and use to establish the legal legitimacy of the fabricated debt. I am going, I replied, grabbing my tailored blazer from the back of my executive chair. I am absolutely not going to negotiate a single penny with her. I am going to let her talk. I need to know exactly how much granular, systemic detail she understands about my internal banking architecture. She is far too sloppy and arrogant to keep her mouth shut if she truly thinks she has already won this war. Isla, it is a trap, Noah insisted. I know, I said flatly. But I am the one walking into it with my eyes wide open. I hung up the phone and slipped the device into my blazer pocket. Before stepping out of my office to face the impending, horrific collision with my own sister, I turned back to my desktop monitor to ensure my secure session on the banking portal had officially timed out. The screen was still active, but the visual layout had fundamentally shifted. Below the massive red banner declaring the civil court-ordered freeze, a new, much smaller, and infinitely more terrifying notification had suddenly materialized. It read, Account restricted. Enhanced fraud review triggered by external complaint. Title 31. Compliance hold active. My blood ran absolute ice cold, freezing the air in my lungs. A civil freeze ordered by a county judge was a tactical nightmare that could eventually be fought and lifted in a courtroom. But a Title 31 compliance hold meant someone had explicitly, intentionally contacted the Bank Internal Security and Fraud Department, filing a formal documented tip alleging active money laundering or federal wire fraud. Mara had not merely filed a bogus civil lawsuit to temporarily stop my cash flow. She had actively, maliciously weaponized the federal banking regulations against me. She had deliberately triggered an automated, completely opaque bureaucratic nightmare designed to lock my operating accounts in a permanent, impenetrable federal vault while government regulators investigated a ghost. This was no longer a squeeze for cash. This was a highly engineered, calculated corporate assassination. The financial district at noon was a suffocating sea of charcoal suits and rushed, aggressive conversations. I navigated the crowded pavement, walking toward the high-end artisanal espresso bar Mara had selected for our meeting. It was an upscale, heavily stylized establishment featuring brushed brass fixtures, imported white marble tables, and floor-to-ceiling soundproof glass. It was exactly the kind of pretentious environment where investment bankers casually closed minor syndication deals over $20 lattes. I spotted her immediately through the heavy glass doors. Mara was sitting in a circular velvet booth near the back of the room, positioned perfectly to observe the entrance. She was wearing a brand-new, immaculately tailored cream silk blazer that screamed high-end designer label, paired with a heavy, ostentatious gold chain necklace. Her hair was perfectly blown out, styled into sharp, deliberate waves. She looked completely out of place, yet desperately trying to project the image of a woman who had already mentally spent $500,000. She was practically vibrating with a smug, anticipatory energy, sipping sparkling water with an air of absolute triumph. She had dressed for a victory lap. Before I even reached the edge of her table, I slipped my right hand into the deep pocket of my blazer. I blindly navigated the smooth glass screen of my smartphone by pure muscle memory, pressing the side toggle and tapping the center of the screen to activate the secure voice memo application. We were standing in a jurisdiction that legally recognized one-party consent for recording any private conversation. I did not require her permission to document her own extortion, and I was not about to leave this room without a permanent audio record of her arrogance. You made me do this to you, Isla, she started. There was no standard greeting, no hesitation. She launched immediately into a practiced, deeply manipulative routine of absolute victimhood. You forced my hand today, Mara continued, her voice loud enough to carry over the ambient jazz music playing from the ceiling speakers. You have spent the last 15 years completely disrespecting this family. You looked down on me, treating me like some pathetic failure while you built your little infrastructure empire. You completely disregarded everything we went through, taking all the credit for yourself. I am just taking back the equity that is rightfully mine. I sat down slowly on the edge of the velvet cushion. I did not order a beverage. I did not offer a defense. I simply looked at her, letting the heavy, uncomfortable silence stretch between us. forcing her to fill the empty void with her own nervous energy. When my silence refused to break, her faux emotional mask slipped away entirely. Her posture stiffened, replaced by a rigid, heavily coached legal persona that did not fit her personality at all. She reached down into her expensive designer tote bag and pulled out a pristine black leather legal portfolio. With a dramatic, sweeping motion, she slid a thick, heavily stapled document across the cold marble table until it bumped against my hands. "This is a final settlement agreement," she announced, her tone shifting into a poor imitation of a corporate litigator. "My attorney drafted it exactly 1 hour ago. It is your only way out of this mess." I picked up the heavy stack of paper. It was a masterpiece of legal entrapment. I scanned the first page, absorbing the brutal financial demands. It required the immediate, unconditional wire transfer of the $500,000 principal debt, plus an additional $180,000 in aggressively calculated back interest and punitive legal fees. The total sum perfectly matched the exact ceiling of the court-ordered attachment, but the financial extortion was not the lethal component of the document. I flipped to the second page and found the poison pill. Hidden beneath a dense paragraph of indemnification clauses was a comprehensive, absolute liability waiver and a binding admission of guilt. The clause explicitly demanded that, by signing my name, I irrevocably acknowledged that the original debt was 100% legitimate, valid, and legally binding. It was a forced confession. If I put my pen on that solid black line, I would permanently destroy any future chance to countersue her for fraud. I would be legally confessing to a lie, forever branding myself as a delinquent debtor who had to be forced by a court to pay her own sister. It would destroy my commercial credit rating and my professional reputation in the disaster recovery industry forever. I needed her to keep talking. I needed to feed her massive, fragile ego until she tripped over her own script. I let my shoulders slump slightly, artificially relaxing my spine to adopt the posture of a thoroughly defeated, desperate executive. "If I sign this paper right now," I said, keeping my voice quiet, allowing a fraction of a manufactured tremble to enter my throat, "how fast does the bank actually turn the corporate accounts back on? I have field crews standing in the mud waiting for their direct deposits right now. The wire cutoffs are incredibly strict. Mara, I need to know the exact timeline." Mara smiled. It was a thin, predatory curve of her glossy lips. She leaned forward across the marble table, bringing her face incredibly close to mine, leaning directly toward the concealed microphone in my pocket. "If you sign it right now, I can call my lawyer from this booth," she gloated, thoroughly enjoying her perceived dominance. "He will electronically file a notice of settlement with the civil court within 10 minutes. But you and I both know that is not the real hurdle anymore, is it? Even if the judge lifts the civil writ this afternoon, your accounts are still completely paralyzed by a Level 3 compliance hold. Standard banking procedure dictates they will absolutely not release a Level 3 hold until the external fraud complaint is formally withdrawn by the reporting party. That reporting party is me, Isla. You are completely dead in the water until I personally make the phone call to clear you." A cold, electric thrill shot straight down my spine, crystallizing my absolute focus. Level 3 compliance hold. That was it. The fatal mistake. That specific phrase was internal risk management terminology used by bank risk teams and federal financial regulators. A civilian plaintiff filing a standard civil lawsuit would never, under any circumstances, know that specific internal alphanumeric designation. They would merely be informed that the account was frozen pending a security review. Someone inside the financial system had given her a detailed map of how to hit my accounts. Furthermore, looking at her incredibly arrogant posture, a second, equally important realization washed over me. She was completely unbothered by the fact that the original physical document was currently sitting in a secure forensic laboratory. She did not even mention it. That meant she either genuinely believed her fabricated digital signature transplant was flawless enough to pass a microscopic inspection, or far more likely, she was absolutely certain my company would financially hemorrhage to death long before the scientists could finalize the chemical report. She was playing the operational clock, assuming I would surrender to save my payroll. I slowly picked up the settlement agreement, folded it cleanly in half, and slipped it into the inside breast pocket of my blazer. I stood up from the velvet booth, smoothing out the fabric of my trousers. I did not say a single word. Her confident smile faltered for a fraction of a second as I refused to engage in the begging she had anticipated. "You cannot just walk away," she hissed, her voice dropping a full octave, instantly losing its polished, practiced sheen. "You do not have many hours left. Ela, your little company is bleeding out right now. By tomorrow morning, you will be nothing." I looked down at her, seeing an absolute stranger wearing my sister's face. I turned on my heel and walked out of the artisanal cafe, pushing through the heavy glass doors and stepping back into the harsh midday sun. I had exactly what I needed. The digital audio file resting in my pocket was not just a tragic recording of a broken sibling relationship. It was the absolute, undeniable, legally admissible proof of a highly coordinated federal extortion conspiracy, and she had just handed it to me wrapped in a neat little bow. The glass doors of Morrow Document Sciences Laboratory slid open with a quiet hiss, instantly sealing away the chaotic, humid air of the city. The atmosphere inside the facility was radically different from the wood-paneled, archaic basement of the county courthouse. It was cool, fiercely filtered, and smelled faintly of ozone and sterilized metallic surfaces. I walked past the minimalist reception desk, my heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor in a steady, determined rhythm. I followed the secure, brightly lit corridor directly to the main examination theater. Dr. Celia Morrow was already waiting for me at the center of the room. She was an absolute legend in federal litigation circles, a meticulous and brilliantly obsessive forensic document examiner who had spent over 2 decades dismantling multi-million-dollar defense contract frauds and exposing highly sophisticated counterfeit government bonds. She did not deal in emotional legal theories or tearful courtroom testimonies. She dealt exclusively in the cold, immutable laws of chemistry, physics, and material science. She wore a pristine white laboratory coat over a dark turtleneck, her graying hair pulled back tightly into a severe practical knot. On the large, brightly lit examination table, situated directly beneath an array of high-intensity diagnostic cameras, encased in a protective static-free polyurethane sleeve, rested the original, physical promissory note. Noah had secured its transfer from the opposing counsel exactly on schedule, maintaining an unbreakable, legally documented chain of custody. Dr. Morrow did not waste our valuable time with polite pleasantries or expressions of sympathy regarding my frozen company. She motioned for me to stand beside a massive, high-definition secondary monitor mounted on the wall. She explained her analytical methodology with chilling robotic precision, detailing the initial, strictly non-destructive testing protocol. We were not going to alter a single fiber of the paper. Her laboratory was systematically analyzing the topographical paper surface, the molecular structure of the ink, the laser toner fusion process, the embossed notary stamp, the structural fiber layers, and the embedded security watermarks. Look closely at the primary signature line. Doctor, Morrow instructed, adjusting the fine focus dial on an incredibly large industrial stereo microscope. The massive digital screen above us flickered to life, displaying my stolen signature magnified several hundred times until it looked like a landscape of jagged black mountains. To the naked human eye, the dark blue ink appears totally normal and valid, the scientist explained, pointing a red laser indicator at the granular edges of a specific letter. But under high-level microscopic magnification, you can clearly observe the physical interaction between the printer toner and the pen stroke. If you sign a freshly printed document with a real pen, the wet ink sits entirely on top of the fused toner powder. It creates a distinct, overlapping layer. Here, the sequence is completely reversed. This signature was imported into a word processing program as a high-resolution image file and printed simultaneously with the typed text. There is no wet pen stroke anywhere on this page. It is a digital clone, a complete structural overprint. I nodded slowly. feeling a grim sense of validation confirming my earlier suspicion from the courthouse basement. But Dr. Morrow was just getting started. She stepped away from the microscope, switched off the bright overhead surgical lights, and activated a specialized, high-intensity ultraviolet matrix suspended above the table. The heavy bond paper immediately illuminated in an eerie, glowing blue hue. "The signature is a very sloppy digital transplant," she continued, her eyes scanning the glowing document. "But the fatal, undeniable flaw is the canvas itself. The date typed at the very top of this contract is precisely 6 years ago. However, the manufacturer of this specific premium commercial bond paper embeds a microscopic, proprietary batch code and a specialized ultraviolet reactive watermark deep into the fiber matrix to prevent corporate counterfeiting." She zoomed the overhead camera onto a bottom corner of the page until a tiny glowing geometric pattern emerged from the darkness. This specific chemical watermark and this exact alphanumeric batch sequence were not introduced into their global supply chain until nearly 24 months after the date printed on this alleged contract. "It is physically, scientifically impossible for you to have signed this document 6 years ago because this exact piece of paper literally did not exist yet." A cold, deeply triumphant energy surged through my veins. The house of cards my sister had built was collapsing at a cellular, molecular level. "Doctor." Morrow shifted the ultraviolet wavelength, changing the frequency of the light. The bright blue notary stamp suddenly flared with a harsh, unnatural greenish-yellow luminescence. "Furthermore, the notary seal is equally fraudulent," the scientist noted, her voice completely flat and devoid of any dramatic inflection. "The pigment ink used in this specific self-inking stamping apparatus contains a proprietary fluorescent tracer compound. That specific chemical additive belongs to a brand new generation of commercial office supplies that only hit the retail market 18 months ago. It completely contradicts the entire timeline established in the sworn civil filing." Then, she walked over to a large, complex piece of machinery that resembled a massive, highly modified flatbed scanner. It was an electrostatic detection apparatus. This is the exact point where the civil fraud escalates into a premeditated, highly organized criminal enterprise. "Doctor," Morrow stated, her tone turning incredibly serious for the very first time. She explained that the machine utilized a specialized toner powder and a high-voltage electrostatic charge to reveal completely invisible physical indentations left on the paper. "Paper," she explained softly, "acts just like a highly sensitive recording device. If someone writes heavily on a piece of paper resting directly on top of the target document, the microscopic downward pressure creates permanent, invisible structural grooves in the cellulose fibers below." She carefully pulled a transparent, electrostatically treated mylar film from the machine and slapped it flat onto a brilliantly lit light box. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Ghostly, shadowy handwriting appeared in the center of the transparent film, entirely distinct from the neat, typed text of the promissory note. It was a handwritten, highly disorganized list. I leaned in close to the glass, reading the indented words one by one. Retainer fee, filing costs, payoff split. Beside those damning words were rough, scribbled percentage calculations and dollar signs. This piece of paper was sitting underneath a standard legal notepad, while the perpetrators literally drafted the financial breakdown of their extortion scheme. "Doctor," Morrow concluded, snapping the lightbox off and plunging the room back into standard illumination. The combination of the anachronistic paper, the future-dated notary ink, the digital signature overprint, and the structural printing sequence completely destroys any claim of reliability. This is not a disputed business contract. This is a manufactured weapon. If you subpoena the paper supply chain records and the regional notary registry to back up my chemical findings, this case takes a very dark, incredibly heavy turn. I stepped away from the examination table, pulling my cell phone from my pocket. My hands were perfectly steady. I dialed Noah immediately. He answered on the very first ring. "The laboratory results are in," I told my attorney. staring hard at the physical evidence of my sister's spectacular impending downfall. The signature is a digital print. The paper was manufactured 2 years after the date on the contract. The notary ink is brand new. And the laboratory found electrostatic indentations on the page outlining the exact financial split of their little extortion plot. Noah let out a low, sharp whistle through the phone speaker. That is an absolute, undeniable kill shot. We are completely pivoting our strategy right now, I commanded, the adrenaline entirely erasing any lingering fatigue from the horrific morning. I do not just want the financial freeze lifted anymore. I want you to start drafting the absolute most aggressive motion for extreme judicial sanctions you have ever written in your career. I want every single dime of my legal fees, the expedited premium laboratory costs, and the absolute maximum punitive damages paid directly by the plaintiff. Furthermore, prepare a massive, comprehensive evidentiary binder. I paused, letting the absolute severity of my next order sink in. As soon as the judge dissolves the civil writ tomorrow, we are marching this entire forensic report, along with the audio recording I secured at the coffee shop this afternoon, directly to the office of the district attorney. We are making a formal criminal referral. We are taking this out of civil court and putting her in front of a prosecutor, Noah confirmed, the predatory, ruthless edge fully returning to his voice. Yes, I replied, my voice steady, cold, and completely devoid of any familial mercy. This is no longer a simple civil dispute over a misunderstood family loan. It is a highly coordinated, intentional fraud upon the court. She tried to use the justice system to crush my company and starve my employees. I am going to use that exact same system to absolutely bury her. The mahogany conference table in Noah Mercer's corner office was completely buried under a chaotic landscape of printed case law, banking regulations, and half-empty coffee cups. I had traveled straight from the forensic laboratory to the downtown high-rise housing his firm, carrying the digital copies of Dr. Morrow's devastating chemical analysis on an encrypted flash drive. While the physical forgery was the weapon that dealt the blow, my mind was entirely fixated on the mechanics of how the blade had been swung with such terrifying, automated precision. Noah was pacing the length of the room, reviewing a heavily redacted timeline his senior paralegal had just projected onto the smartboard. He stopped and pointed a silver pen at 2 specific, glowing timestamps. Look at the chronological sequence of the attack, Noah instructed, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. The county clerk officially stamped the ex parte emergency attachment order at exactly 8:45 this morning. According to the encrypted logs Reed Tanner forwarded to us, the bank's internal anti-money laundering protocol, the Title 31 compliance hold, was aggressively triggered at exactly 8:49. I stared at the 4-minute gap. A cold, analytical calculation ran through my head. That is mathematically impossible, I stated softly, walking closer to the glowing screen. A local county court does not possess a direct, real-time digital integration with a private commercial bank's federal compliance algorithm. A human being at the bank would have had to receive the civil order, read the allegations, conduct a preliminary risk assessment, and manually escalate it to the Federal Fraud Division. You cannot execute that bureaucratic chain of command in 240 seconds. Exactly, Noah agreed, slamming his pen down on the table. Which means the federal compliance hold was not a reaction to the civil lawsuit. It was a simultaneous, coordinated strike. Someone preloaded the banking system with a highly specific external complaint, timing it to detonate the exact moment the civil judge signed the freeze. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket and navigated to the audio recording I had secretly captured at the artisanal cafe. I played the specific segment where Mara's voice dropped, brimming with arrogant certainty. I listened to her boast about the Level 3 compliance hold and how standard banking procedure dictated I was completely dead in the water until she personally withdrew the complaint. She did not learn that terminology from a standard family law attorney or a quick internet search, I said, pausing the playback. That is highly classified, proprietary vernacular used exclusively by risk management syndicates. Noah, she had an architect, Someone who understands the subterranean plumbing of the commercial banking system drew her a map. Noah immediately mobilized his litigation team. Because the underlying issue involved a massive disruption to a federally bonded disaster recovery contractor and carried explicit allegations of bank fraud, he possessed the leverage to bypass standard discovery delays. He filed an aggressive, incredibly narrow emergency subpoena directly targeting Sentinel Risk Logic, the massive third-party vendor that processed automated fraud alerts for my commercial bank. We waited in the suffocating tension of the conference room for 3 grueling hours. When the encrypted compliance logs finally arrived from the vendor's legal department, the hidden architecture of my sister's conspiracy was laid bare. The digital footprints did not point to a mastermind criminal syndicate or a high-powered corporate saboteur. The IP address and user credentials that had actively accessed the highly restricted multi-trigger hold protocol manual 3 weeks prior belonged to a dormant employee account. The email address associated with that specific account was registered to a man named Julian Vance. Julian was Mara's ex-boyfriend. He was a mid-level data analyst who had been terminated from a banking compliance subcontractor nearly 2 years ago. A wave of profound, chilling clarity washed over me as I connected the disparate pieces of the puzzle. Julian did not possess the courage or the resources to physically forge a $500,000 promissory note. He did not buy the anachronistic paper or secure the fluorescent notary ink. But he provided something infinitely more dangerous. He provided the operational instruction manual. "Look at the specific search queries logged on his old account," Noah pointed out, scrolling through the dense pages of digital evidence. He was researching algorithmic trigger words. He was looking for the exact combination of allegations guaranteed to force a commercial bank into a state of absolute, unbreakable paralysis. Julian had coached her. He had instructed Mara to weave the specific phrases Nevada, Wyoming, and dissipation of assets into her fabricated civil affidavit. He knew that a simple claim of unpaid debt would merely result in a standard, easily contested civil freeze. But by strategically combining a massive financial demand with explicit keywords indicating offshore money laundering and capital flight, he guaranteed the bank's automated risk management software would seize control of the accounts, completely stripping my private banker of any authority to intervene. Julian designed a perfect storm, a systemic hack engineered to lock me out of my own life while preventing any judge from granting a temporary reprieve. This revelation fundamentally shifted the entire landscape of the battlefield. We were no longer dealing with a predictable, emotionally driven case of a jealous younger sister lashing out for attention or a quick payday. Mara had spent weeks meticulously researching, planning, and executing a sophisticated corporate siege using specialized insider knowledge to weaponize the financial system against me. "We need to amend the motion for sanctions immediately," Noah declared, already pulling up a fresh legal document on his laptop. "We will drag Julian Vance into the center of this courtroom. We will expose the entire conspiracy and completely annihilate her narrative." "No," I commanded, my voice slicing through his rising momentum. "We do not breathe a single word about Julian Vance to opposing counsel. Not yet." Noah looked at me, completely bewildered. "Isla, this is the smoking gun that proves premeditation. Why would we hide it? Because she is incredibly manipulative and highly adaptable," I explained, leaning over the mahogany table, my eyes fixed on the timeline. "If we reveal that we know about Julian's involvement right now, before she is forced to swear under oath in front of the judge, she will instantly pivot. She will drop the confident, aggressive posture and play the ultimate victim. She will cry in open court, claiming Julian was a controlling, abusive ex-boyfriend who forced her into this scheme and gave her terrible legal advice. She will try to shift the entire burden of the perjury onto his shoulders." I stood up, walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the darkening city skyline. The streetlights were flickering on, illuminating the concrete canyons below. I had to protect my company, but I also had to completely neutralize the threat. "We have to let her walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning believing she is the smartest person in the room," I continued, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. We have to let her confidently own every single lie on the public record. Only after she completely commits to the forgery do we drop the floor out from under her. As I stared out at the city, the final, most devastating psychological realization finally locked into place. The entire attack made perfect, terrifying sense. Mara did not just want $500,000. The money was merely the mechanism. If I had surrendered at the artisanal cafe, if I had signed that settlement agreement to save my weekly payroll, I would have legally confessed to a massive financial fraud. Ridgeline Utility Recovery held extremely lucrative, multi-year municipal contracts that contained strict moral turpitude and absolute financial solvency clauses. A confessed, defaulted, $500,000 debt would instantly trigger an automatic breach of contract cascade. I would lose my municipal bonding. The board of directors and my commercial lenders would force me to step down as the chief executive officer to save the enterprise. And who would be waiting in the wings, presenting herself as the responsible, deeply concerned family member ready to assume control of the equity during the ensuing corporate restructuring? My sister. She did not want to rob my company. She wanted to steal my entire throne. She wanted to shatter my lifelong creditworthiness, destroy my unblemished professional reputation, and permanently strip away my executive control. I turned away from the window, the last remnants of my exhaustion evaporating into absolute cold-blooded resolve. I was going to walk into that courthouse tomorrow morning, and I was going to burn her entire world to the ground. I did not leave the law firm until the city lights outside were burning bright against the night sky. We had exactly 14 hours until the emergency hearing convened at 9 o'clock the next morning. The sheer volume of work required to save my enterprise was staggering, but I could not afford to succumb to the crushing physical exhaustion. I needed a flawless, synchronized counteroffensive. I engineered a highly compartmentalized, three-tiered battle plan. Layer 1 was pure operational survival. Layer 2 was the complete scientific destruction of the fabricated evidence. Layer 3 was the absolute, inescapable legal containment of my own sister. I started with the immediate bleeding. Sitting in the corner of the conference room, I finalized the authorization for the manual drawdown from my commercial credit facility. It was a massive, high-interest gamble that violated every conservative financial principle I held, but it absolutely guaranteed my 80 field employees would wake up to their direct deposits. Then, I personally called the chief executive officers of my two largest equipment and fuel vendors. I did not sugarcoat the severe situation, but I projected absolute, unwavering confidence. I leveraged a solid decade of flawless, early payment history to negotiate a critical 72-hour grace period on all heavy machinery deliveries and diesel refueling schedules. They agreed to hold the supply chain completely intact without requiring an immediate wire transfer. My disaster recovery sites would not suffer a single hour of downtime. The vital operational heartbeat of my company was temporarily stabilized, buying me the exact window of time I desperately needed to fight, while I aggressively defended the supply lines. My attorney secured the heavy ammunition. He obtained a sworn, legally binding affidavit from the forensic scientist, detailing the catastrophic chemical and structural failures of the forged document in brutal, undeniable scientific terminology. But my legal counsel did not stop there. He bypassed local channels and reached out directly to the corporate headquarters of the specific commercial paper manufacturer. By late evening, he received a certified, notarized declaration from their vice president of production. The document unequivocally confirmed that the specific microscopic watermark and the proprietary batch code embedded in the physical promissory note did not enter commercial circulation until roughly 2 years after the date typed on the contract. It was an impenetrable, towering wall of scientific fact. The third tier of the strategy was the trap itself. My attorney spent the entire night drafting 3 devastating, interconnected legal motions. The first was an emergency motion to dissolve the writ of attachment, demanding the immediate unfreezing of my corporate bank accounts to prevent systemic commercial failure. The second was an incredibly aggressive motion for extreme judicial sanctions, specifically citing the fraudulent civil filing, deliberate perjury, and intentional tortious interference with my municipal contracts. The final piece was a formal, urgent request to permanently impound the original physical document with the court clerk, ensuring the opposing legal team could never alter, conveniently lose, or destroy the physical evidence once they realized the trap had officially sprung. The opposing side must have sensed the sudden, ominous silence radiating from my camp. Bullies always grow incredibly anxious when their chosen victims abruptly stop struggling. Shortly after 8 o'clock that evening, an email notification chimed on my phone. Her tone had shifted drastically from the arrogant conqueror I had met at the artisanal cafe just hours prior. She suddenly claimed she wanted to resolve the dispute privately, keeping the highly sensitive financial matters strictly within the family to avoid public embarrassment. However, the offered olive branch was tightly wrapped in razor wire. She included a thinly veiled, highly destructive threat, suggesting that a prolonged public court battle might force her, out of a profound sense of civic duty, to share her deep concerns about my operational stability with the state contractor licensing board. It was a desperate, malicious attempt to force my hand before the morning hearing, threatening my fundamental right to bid on government work. I felt absolutely zero emotional reaction to her toxic manipulation. I forwarded the message directly to my legal team with strict, uncompromising instructions. We were going to feed her massive ego. My attorney sent a brief, highly calculated response to her lawyer, vaguely hinting that I was facing a severe internal liquidity crisis, that the credit lines were maxed out, and that I was actively considering signing a settlement if the total payment amount could be slightly reduced to accommodate my immediate cash flow deficit. It was a pure, unadulterated bait tactic. We needed to keep her overconfident, greedy, and completely unaware of the forensic nightmare waiting to devour her in the courtroom. The psychological bait worked flawlessly. Less than an hour later, her attorney fired back a revised settlement agreement. They dropped the total demand by $20,000, aggressively pushing for a quick midnight signature to lock in their victory. But in their greedy, adrenaline-fueled rush to close the extortion plot, they made a fatal, arrogant mistake. I scanned the itemized breakdown of the newly proposed payment structure on my laptop screen. My eyes instantly locked onto the specific line items. The revised structure explicitly demanded a 25% retainer fee, a fixed dollar amount for administrative filing costs, and a highly specific percentage ratio for the payoff split between the plaintiff and her legal counsel. My breath caught in my throat. The numbers, the exact phrasing, and the specific sequential order of the fees matched the invisible, electrostatic indentations the laboratory had discovered on the original forged paper perfectly. She had literally sent me the finalized, typed receipt for her own extortion plot, legally confirming the exact terms of the phantom document she had used to practice her financial breakdown. I left the law firm just before midnight and drove back to my own corporate headquarters. The massive, sprawling building was completely empty, profoundly silent, and entirely dark. I walked into my executive suite and turned on a single, focused desk lamp. I did not pour a glass of bourbon to celebrate a premature victory. I did not feel the triumphant, euphoric rush of an impending win. The stress was still a physical weight crushing my chest. I sat completely alone in the shadows, meticulously arranging each physical exhibit into perfectly tabbed, heavy legal binders. I lined up the paper manufacturer declaration, the forensic laboratory report, the audio transcription from the cafe, and the newly revised, self-incriminating settlement offer. I arranged them precisely, squaring the corners of the paper like a trauma surgeon laying out sterilized scalpels before a high-risk, life-or-death operation. I had built an absolute, undeniable mountain of evidence, but the terrifying reality remained entirely unchanged. If the presiding judge did not instantly believe the science, if the court demanded a lengthy, drawn-out trial to verify the complex forensic facts, my company would still suffocate to death before the truth ever saw the light of day. Everything I had built over the last decade hinged entirely on the first 5 minutes of tomorrow morning. The double oak doors of the county civil courtroom swung open precisely at 9 in the morning. I walked down the center aisle with my shoulders pulled back and my spine rigidly straight, projecting an aura of absolute, unbreakable calm. The heavy mahogany gallery pews were surprisingly crowded. A sudden emergency ex parte freeze executed against a fully operational, multi-million-dollar disaster recovery firm was incredibly rare. It had sent a massive shockwave through the local financial and legal sectors. Several unaffiliated corporate litigators and bankruptcy specialists had slipped into the back rows, eager to watch a high-stakes corporate execution unfold in real time. I took my seat at the heavy defense table next to Noah. Across the center aisle, Mara was already seated. She had abandoned the flashy designer blazer from our cafe meeting, opting instead for a conservative, muted gray suit that projected a fabricated image of a responsible, deeply concerned sibling. However, the man sitting next to her was completely unexpected. She had discarded the original attorney who filed the initial paperwork. In his place sat Grant Voss, a notoriously aggressive, highly theatrical civil litigator known for tearing through courtrooms with a scorched earth methodology. The bailiff announced the arrival of the presiding judge, a stern, deeply weathered man named Caldwell, who immediately took his seat at the elevated bench. He did not waste a single second on pleasantries. He looked down at the massive docket file, his expression etched with profound irritation. Before the judge could even fully articulate the first question, Grant Voss launched his preemptive strike. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with a sharp, practiced motion, instantly attempting to dominate the physical space of the courtroom. Voss did not play defense. He went straight for my throat. He gestured dramatically toward my table, his voice echoing loudly against the acoustic ceiling tiles. He painted a highly vivid, entirely fictitious portrait of me as a ruthless, rogue chief executive officer deliberately using complex corporate structures to hide vast amounts of personal wealth. He hammered the words "flight risk" repeatedly. He boldly asserted to the court that the signature resting on the bottom of the contested promissory note was absolutely, undeniably authentic, claiming that any attempt by my defense team to question the ink was a desperate, bad-faith delay tactic. He demanded that the court not only uphold the temporary freeze on all my corporate accounts, but actively escalate the mandate, formally requesting a permanent injunction and the immediate appointment of an independent financial receiver to seize total control of my enterprise. It was a brilliant, terrifying performance designed to overwhelm the judge with sheer aggression. I kept my face entirely blank, resting my hands flat on the polished wooden table. I did not glare at my sister. I did not shake my head in denial. I simply watched the game unfold, treating the courtroom exactly like a high-stakes poker table. The first person to show genuine emotion was the one holding the weakest hand. When Voss finally finished his aggressive opening salvo, the heavy silence in the room shifted to our table. Noah stood up. He did not match Voss in volume or theatricality. His demeanor was completely serene, almost dangerously quiet. Noah did not offer a passionate defense of my character. He did not waste the court's valuable time arguing about our family history, the origins of my business, or the alleged phantom loan. Instead, he made a simple, highly structural procedural request. He calmly asked the judge to completely alter the standard sequence of the hearing. Before the court entertained a single legal argument regarding the validity of the alleged debt or the necessity of a financial receiver, Noah requested that the court first examine the direct physical forensic evidence concerning Exhibit A, the promissory note itself. The atmospheric pressure in the room shifted instantly. Voss narrowed his eyes, clearly thrown off balance by the absolute lack of defensive panic from my attorney. I shifted my gaze slightly to observe Mara. She was sitting completely still, her posture relaxed, a faint, condescending smirk playing at the very corners of her mouth. She was thoroughly convinced that my team was simply grasping at straws. She firmly believed that we were going to present some convoluted, highly technical theory about handwriting analysis. She was absolutely certain that the judge, lacking a scientific background, would look at the perfectly replicated shape of the letters, deem the signature visually authentic, and completely dismiss any technical arguments about the material. She thought the paper was her impenetrable shield. As I watched her quiet arrogance, a profound, chilling realization washed over me. I looked over at Grant Voss, analyzing his aggressive, confident posture. He was completely blind. Mara had not told her new bulldog attorney the entire truth. Perhaps she thought the details were irrelevant, or perhaps she was too arrogant to realize the massive trail of digital breadcrumbs she had left behind. Regardless of her reasoning, Voss was operating in total darkness. He had absolutely no idea about the fatal anachronisms involving the paper manufacturer batch codes. He did not know about the invisible electrostatic indentations revealing the exact percentages of their extortion payoff. He was completely unaware of the damning email his own client had sent me the previous night, which perfectly mirrored the hidden indentations. And he certainly had no clue about the high-definition audio recording securely saved on my encrypted server, explicitly detailing a federal banking compliance breach. He was standing on a landmine, completely oblivious to the fact that the trigger was already depressed. Judge Caldwell leaned forward, folding his hands over the heavy wooden bench. He glared down at both legal tables, his patience clearly evaporating. He explicitly stated his profound displeasure with the entire proceeding. He reminded everyone in the room that utilizing an emergency ex parte procedure to freeze the operational capital of an active municipal disaster contractor was an incredibly extreme measure that severely impacted public infrastructure. His voice dropped to a low, gravelly warning that echoed clearly to the very back row of the gallery. He stated that if he discovered either party was utilizing his courtroom to execute a bad faith financial extortion scheme or deliberately stalling a legitimate debt collection to hide assets, the consequences would be catastrophic. He promised that the fallout would extend far beyond a simple civil penalty, explicitly threatening severe judicial sanctions and an immediate referral to the district attorney for felony perjury charges. The heavy threat hung in the air, cold and absolute. Noah did not flinch. He simply nodded his head in respectful agreement with the judge. Then, he reached down to the floor beside his chair. This was the precise moment the trap sprang shut. Noah lifted a massive, heavily bound, sealed evidentiary binder and walked slowly toward the clerk's desk. It was not a thin standard legal motion. It was an incredibly thick, dense stack of documents, measuring several inches deep. The heavy thud of the binder hitting the wood echoed loudly through the silent courtroom. Protruding from the thick stack of paper were bright, color-coded index tabs, clearly labeled with the names of a premier federal forensic laboratory and a major international paper manufacturer. I kept my eyes locked directly on my sister. For the very first time since this entire nightmare began, the smug, condescending rhythm of Mara's breathing completely stopped. Her eyes widened, instantly locking onto the massive, terrifying physical weight of the evidence file sitting on the clerk's desk. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her pale and visibly trembling as she stared at the mountain of science that was about to bury her alive. Noah did not waste a single breath on grandstanding. He opened the massive evidentiary binder and systematically dismantled my sister's fabricated reality, presenting the forensic facts in an order that offered absolutely no avenue for retreat. First, he directed the judge to the laboratory conclusions regarding the signature. He presented the microscopic imaging analysis, clearly demonstrating that the ink lacked any physical depression into the toner layer, proving it was a digital overprint, not a wet signature. Grant Voss attempted to stand and object, citing a lack of foundation, but Judge Caldwell silenced him with a sharp wave of his hand. His eyes locked onto the scientific report. Then, Noah delivered the fatal blow. He pulled out the sworn, notarized declaration from the vice president of the commercial paper manufacturer. He read the statement into the court record, his voice echoing with absolute authority. The specific microscopic watermark and the proprietary batch code embedded within the physical fibers of the alleged promissory note were not introduced into their commercial supply chain until nearly 2 years after the date typed at the top of the document. The courtroom went dead silent. Judge Caldwell leaned back in his high leather chair, his jaw visibly tightening. The entire foundation of the lawsuit, the tragic tale of a desperate loan signed 6 years ago, evaporated into thin air, It was a physical, chronological impossibility. But Noah was not finished. He turned the page, introducing the findings from the electrostatic detection apparatus. He displayed the ghostly, invisible indentations recovered from the surface of the forged paper, highlighting the handwritten notes detailing a retainer fee, filing costs, and a specific percentage payoff split. Before Voss could even formulate a coherent defense against the indentations, Noah introduced our final piece of documentary evidence. He submitted the revised settlement agreement that Mara had emailed to us late the previous night. Noah placed the two documents side by side on the overhead projector. The itemized financial demands in her midnight settlement offer matched the hidden electrostatic calculations flawlessly. It was absolute, undeniable proof that the promissory note was not a historical record of a family loan, but a prop specifically manufactured to facilitate a premeditated extortion scheme. To seal the inescapable trap, Noah requested permission to play a brief audio file. The judge granted it. The crisp, clear sound of my sister's voice filled the courtroom. We listened to her arrogant boasting at the artisanal cafe, hearing her explicitly threaten me with the highly classified Level 3 compliance hold and bragging about how I was completely dead in the water until she personally called off the federal dogs. The audio recording completely obliterated any remaining facade of a simple civil dispute. It proved she possessed deep, systemic knowledge of the banking infrastructure and had deliberately weaponized it to choke my operational cash flow. Grant Voss realized instantly that he was standing on the deck of a sinking ship. In a desperate, self-preserving tactical retreat, he physically stepped away from Mara. He addressed the court in a frantic, stammering tone, claiming he had relied entirely on the documentation provided by his client in good faith. He formally requested to withdraw his aggressive motions and begged the court to simply refer the matter to a standard civil appraisal process at a later date. Judge Caldwell was absolutely incandescent with rage. He slammed his gavel down, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. He stared directly at Mara, who was now trembling violently, tears of genuine, terrified panic finally streaming down her pale face. The judge declared that this was no longer a standard civil dispute over an unpaid debt. He officially categorized her actions as a blatant, malicious fraud upon the court. He ordered the immediate, unconditional dissolution of the writ of attachment. Furthermore, he commanded the court clerk to dispatch an emergency electronic mandate directly to the legal department of my commercial bank, ordering the absolute release of all my corporate accounts before the afternoon operational cutoff. Then, the hammer truly fell. Judge Caldwell granted our motion for extreme judicial sanctions in its entirety. He legally bound Mara to pay every single dollar of my emergency legal representation, the exorbitant fees for the expedited forensic laboratory analysis, and a massive punitive financial penalty for filing a fraudulent claim that recklessly endangered the livelihoods of dozens of innocent, hard-working employees. The final blow came with cold, bureaucratic efficiency. The judge ordered the bailiff to permanently seal the original forged promissory note, the forensic laboratory reports, and the audio transcript. He announced, on the official public record, that he was transferring the entire evidentiary file directly to the district attorney of the county, accompanied by a highly urgent judicial recommendation to initiate a grand jury investigation for multiple felony counts of document forgery, aggravated perjury, and malicious abuse of the legal process. I did not stay to watch the bailiff escort her out. I walked out of the courtroom, descended the heavy marble stairs, and drove straight back to Ridgeline Utility Recovery. The office was buzzing with the nervous, frantic energy of an impending disaster. I walked straight past the anxious faces of my executive team, entered my private office, and closed the heavy glass door. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. I logged into my secure commercial banking portal. The massive, terrifying red banners were gone. The screens had refreshed. The ledgers were glowing in a calm, steady green. I did not pour a drink. I did not cry tears of relief. I simply moved my mouse over the master payroll batch, verified the total dollar amount, and firmly clicked the final approval button. The system processed the transaction instantly, sending the lifeblood of my company out to the men and women standing in the mud. I closed the laptop, letting the quiet hum of the air conditioner fill the room, feeling nothing but the cold, absolute finality of ending a financial war my sister had chosen to start. Thank you for listening. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories and like the video so more people can find it.